lines.
So, Jamarl, I would ask you what the top priority is for today, but I'm looking and I see betrayals. Start us off with that. Where
Betrayals indeed, Shane. Betrayals indeed. I want to talk about the RNC and the Democratic National Committee conventions. Betrayals. Betrayals. That is what I want to talk about, Shane. The radical betrayal of America. Not just of individual party members of the various parties that these guys were talking about. No. Because at the end of the day, those parties are supposed to get in power and represent the interests of the public. No, I am talking about the radical betrayal of America itself and the representative system itself and the constituents in those various parties that full well believe they have nowhere else to go and this is the guy they're going to vote for. More so for Democrats. The overwhelming majority of the Republicans want Trump. This is our guy. I think it's like 70% or more. The overwhelming majority of the Democrats are voting for Biden because he is not Trump. I'm saying that however you peruse this, whether you believe that Trump is your guy, whether you believe that Biden is your guy, whether you believe you're stuck, it is a betrayal of America to have both parties to be so radical and purist as to not even pretend to represent America. I mean, for God's sakes, the world has fallen off of its axis. Millions evictions, millions food insecurities, millions of unemployed, millions of people without health care, and hundreds of thousands dead, let alone millions infected with the disease. And you bring out these two pageants that has not even a concern about policy. How? How does that work? FDR gets in office and acts like the world is under assault by aliens. That's the responsibility that he took when he got in office. Can you honestly say that with all of these plagues that are availing America, and you see these two beauty pageants that basically are talking to each other, grinning idiots, plastic faces, looking at you and telling you all of this other stuff that has nothing to do with the fact that the world has fallen off its axis? Is there not even a wisp of responsibility, a feeling of responsibility for those offices that you hold? What is wrong with you? The DNC and the RNC both trotted out the social contract and basically urinated on it in American television, grinning broadly and waving the flag while they were doing it. This is not a time for politics for the sake of politics. There are real traumas that people are grappling with, issues of policies created by the same goblins that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were trotting out. For once, Democrats, let's talk about them for the moment. They didn't even pretend that they were going to pull to the side of policy to ameliorate the rough edges. Let's listen to Rahm Emanuel for a moment. Rahm Emanuel talking about the year of the Biden Republican. Let's hear him. Clip one. Okay, maybe we don't have the clips. So we have Rahm Emanuel calling for the year of the Biden Republican. Now think about what that means. You are basically putting out a bunch of Republicans on stage and saying, we're going to reach out to those Republicans. We're going to get those Republicans. We're going to keep those Republicans. Two reasons. One, lefties got too irascible and you needed to get rid of them. And two, if you can get those Republicans, you add on a certain level of security from your standpoint as third-way Democrats, where you don't have to look for this notion of policy. You don't have to talk about these real issues that people care about. You got those people locked, blacks, Hispanics, and lefties, entirely because they're not Republicans. Entirely because those Democrats will stand there and say blue no matter who and everything else, and you're stuck. So yeah, they can hold you in a box of sorts, but you scared them. And a sense of urgency that was necessary that they picked up on when they thought that Sanders was going to take it, made them, we need something to mitigate these lefties. We need something to ensure that we can stay in political power. And we want to be able to marginalize those lefties, and we want to be able to appropriate those Republicans that basically can agree with us anyway. If you're a Reagan Democrat or Reagan Republican, you will fit right in with the current Democratic Party. They know that. So that's where they went. Policy did not matter the Republican Party comes out and give one speech after speech after speech going after Joe Biden whole hog, attacking him viciously, relentlessly, with one political flourish after the next. You should hear Representative Matt Gaetz. If we get the opportunity, I'm going to get that clip. But Gaetz goes after Joe Biden, auditorium as empty as Joe Biden's head. And Joe Biden is going to basically have thugs and criminals on the streets running roughshod, eating people like vampires the moment that you put a Joe Biden in because he's going to defund the police. This was the nonsense these guys were talking about. You have one party that is basically setting a straw man on fire, and you have another party who says, look, those guys are monsters, so we don't have to do anything real. We can just play politics in the midst of a pandemic. Where is your sense of responsibility? And has it gotten so detached, meaning the device, the edifice, the thing that keeps the American public attached, or let's say our political space attached to the wants and the needs of American public? Have we gotten so far in the wilderness, in the boonies, where the representative government thing is just a shtick? It's just the thing that we say. It's just a narrative, a fig leaf, a propaganda element. And that the reality of it is that both parties have unmoored themselves like a Frankenstein monster roaming the world, where it doesn't even acknowledge that there's a public back there that it is supposed to represent. It's all about getting in office. It's nothing about the responsibility of that office. And when I say that is a betrayal in the context of what is going on out there, the catastrophes, do you realize I had a call with my mom yesterday, and we were having a conversation about trying to figure out what we were going to do with my grandmother. Because basically, the government doesn't entirely help, and it leaves families left to their own devices. There is no way for them to square that circle. It is impossible for my mom to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And yet, that's the position that she's being confronted with. Your grandmother is ill, your grandmother is sick, we need somebody to do it. You can't do it by yourself. What are you going to do? And if she was alone, she has no options. Only because I am able to intervene are we able to add in another nurse that has to be paid for out of pocket. This catastrophe, all across the United States, 50%, no options. Those families suffer, they get injured, all of the stress, they do drugs and all of these other things to try to make this stuff meet. And at the end of the day, they sit at home and cry, not having enough food, not having the ability to pay rent, not knowing where even the next rent check is going to come from. Yeah, having family members that you need to care for and pay for, and having no capacity or ability at all to do that. And your physical energies in and of themselves aren't enough. That is a catastrophe. And I hate to tell you this, that was happening before COVID. That is happening now. And that is getting worse with COVID. Those are miniature catastrophes that take place all across the United States. And there is nothing in either one of those speeches that would ameliorate that simple, basic, end-of-life condition. You have failed in your responsibilities, all of you. And it is time for lefties to stop acquiescing to what is basically a perpetuation of our current situation. This is a betrayal of America to DNC and the RNC. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Jamarl, you were talking about the RNC and the DNC, and I think I remember the word catastrophe being used, and I remember it sounding sort of apocalyptic. I think things are bad. It's endearing how sort of honest and sincere and consistent you are in your criticisms of the system, because they're worth it. My point is, I just don't know that okay, 2020 is especially bad. And sure, I was looking at the DNC, like the convention itself, as a sort of a spectacle with, people be like, I thought of it as the Good Morning America of political conventions. And that feeling still holds true. I'm not sure how I want to put the RNC, but the convention, I don't know. The conventions themselves aren't that bad. It's just that specifically with the DNC, I know that you watching that don't feel like your interests are at all represented. And so it's pretty damn frustrating for you. But on the other hand, the conventions aren't terrible. It's just the state of the world and the state of America in general that is arguably terrible. I don't know. What's your take, Jamarl?
Well, let me ask you this way. Rational actor. You're part of a country. You grew up believing in a social contract. And you believing that you have a representative government, that you vote for somebody who's going to go to Washington and represent your interests. very basic, schoolboy philosophy of things, of politics. And you end up with a crisis. You end up with multiple. There are battles on the street between cops and protesters that have been going on for months. And this has been expanded now into Wisconsin, which we have no idea where that's going to go. And honestly, if those cases come back where they're not going to prosecute for Breonna Taylor, we could see an influx of that. We have, 10, 20 million people, 30 million people out of a job, meaning those people are in utter catastrophes, not knowing where they're going to eat, not knowing even if they're going to be able to keep their place. 10, 20 million thrown out of their homes is an estimate. 300,000 dead. I mean, this is just the beginning. That's not even getting down into the down the road consequences. When those PPE loans have stopped, now those people don't have the ability to keep those workers on, or those workers don't have the ability to have the extra income to even feed themselves. Like, this is an utter catastrophe. And so when I said the world has fallen off its axis for tens of millions of people, it has. Now go back to your political space for the moment. In the middle of an election where it would think that your representative government would represent you, especially in a time like this, they give those two beauty pageants where policy didn't matter. The Republican pageant just went after Joe Biden, empty-headed. Donald Trump is a visionary, just nonsense, and nothing in comparison to the challenge and the task that is availing us. Nothing to deal with the real anguish that people are dealing with. That's all I'm getting at. I'm just looking at this and saying, these people are trying to get elected to president. And these people are trying to get elected in the middle of a crisis. And it seems that the crisis doesn't matter. Barely even mentioned. And instead, they go into their own politics confident that if you're a Democrat, you're stuck with that party. And if you're a Republican, you're stuck with them. It's a betrayal. That's the way I see it. And if I sound apocalyptic, I would imagine for a lot of people out there, this feels apocalyptic. I'm just making the connection that in no way did what take place in those pageants correlate to any real, rational, at least what people would call rational to the tune of life and limb and social contract. Neither one of those things had any tether to rationality in regards to what you would think if you were looking for preserving and maintaining some level of a social contract, or even having some level of responsibility to the country and the offices they're trying to ascribe to. Yeah, I thought it was astonishingly horrible.
I don't know. It's a certain group of elites trying to maintain their hold on power. That's all that it is, frankly. That's what you're watching. And
Yes.
the fact that's disillusioning for you, or to see it that way. I mean, the thing is that I think you already know that. I'm not coming to you with any lessons you don't know, and vice versa here, at least on this issue.
Yeah, I know, but it's this thing of
we're
I know, but there are real things that go beyond just politics.
totally.
And
Well, kind of. But if you're a political
if these
creature, then there aren't. Power is all that's real. Power is all
right,
that's real if you're a
but
political beast, and that's all that you are.
I know, but there are
And
times
another way of
where,
looking at it,
well, I was just gonna say there are times where there's a crack in the veneer, because regardless of us knowing that, the argument that they make is we're representative government, we're fighting for the public. Fine. If you're gonna make that argument, if you're gonna get on the news, and if you're gonna say we're fighting for America and we're pushing back against Republicans, so that's fine. Then I am gonna use the argumentation of how are you doing that? And you can see a crack in the veneer, and that's what they represent versus the real world reality of what people are going through. And my point is to elucidate the disconnect between those things. That's why I take that framing of
Totally.
argumentation, because I try to hold them on their own petard.
No, of course. And I mean, like you're saying, they don't represent that. I see it as a sort of structural thing. I see it as they can't represent it. I mean, I have my own weird sort of parochial take, specifically like a parochial take, right? I think that we got too centralized, and that the federal government built things up a bit too much. It could sound libertarian to people, it could sound conservative to people, or it could sound like anarchist or something, or American federalism. I don't know. It could sound all these different ways. My point is, that's my personal take. But I because of that take, I see this as a structural problem that's sort of inevitable. Like, you're going to get these political elites who try to maintain their power independent from the people. When you get in a democracy specifically, when you get above a certain size, because that's what inevitably happens if people can't effectively represent themselves. If you create a party bureaucracy to represent them, it's this self-defeating process. So I see it as mechanical. For me, therefore, it's like, technologically, socially, institutionally, structurally, how do you change it on those deeper levels? And that's another conversation. But I guess what I wanted to point out is it's just endearing to hear you sort of regularly trying to hold them to their own standard. I've kind of moved past that. I'm like, okay, what do we do to replace this? But I don't know. What you're doing is valuable too. It's just anyway. I'm just framing that. That's how I saw that. That's how I took your monologue. Was you pushing back on this idea? Just very simply, you're not representing us. Very simply, the government. Both of these branches of our government aren't representing us, and that's not right. And I think that that's absolutely appropriate. Just having that perspective, having that response. I think that that's a justified sort of emotional response. In fact, I think that's the justified emotional response to have, at least to the extent that it gets you to take action.
Yeah, I mean, because my point is, there are a lot of people out there that not like us in one bit. They go out, they do their jobs every day, they kiss their kids in the morning, they eat their cornflakes, and they work and come back home. And they may play Xbox, they may go to the movies or whatever else, but they live their life. And from the standpoint of politics, it's vague and something that's out there. It's ethereal. It's almost magic. And they look at their government and could think, okay, they got us, right? At the end of the day, our government does what we need it to do to back us. And there are tens of millions of those. I am telling you, I've met these people. And they are oblivious to the larger realities of their political space. And if you tell them, look, they're not representing your interests, they'll be shocked by that statement. What? What do you mean? What do you mean? I mean, they're not perfect, but they're doing their jobs. They're trying to help America. This is just the best that they can do. And in their heads, they would frame it in those terms. My objective is to shake those people and say, look, how can both of those things be true? How can you have two convention speeches like that and come away with the opinion that, yeah, both of these parties are looking out for my interests? I am trying to show them that both of these items cannot be true. And if I'm right, and the one that's not true is that they're representing your interests, what does it mean? What does it mean? I'm trying to get the cognitive dissonance to actually come to loggerheads and say, oh, wait, that guy's right. That guy's right. There are millions of people out there suffering, and these guys are talking about Joe Biden's empty head. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to hit it from that angle. It's not because I don't know it. It's not. It is true that I'm frustrated to some degree by it, because I do realize that there are real people with real traumas that they have to deal with. And you hear these people who will tell you at any moment, who are representing the interests of America, get out here and put on two beauty pageants like this. Yeah, they should be ashamed of themselves. Both. They're not right. They're just trying to get elected. Everything else is subordinate to that. And the very fact that you have basically two parties that can play off one another, well, at that point, you can get rid of policy because it's a fight between these two people. And the public is stuck watching Godzilla and King Kong thinking to themselves, I don't have a play in this, despite the fact that it created both. Yeah, it's disheartening, to put it mildly.
We've got a call.